Buenos días a todos. I'm afraid that's the end of my Spanish. Oh no? Dos cervezas, por favor. So, thank you for the introduction, Antonella. Because I don't speak Spanish, I haven't the faintest idea what she said about me. I hope it was good, but we'll see as we go along. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be in Spain. The last time I was in Fuengirola was in 1972, before most of you were born, before most of Fuengirola was built, I think. So, very good pleasure, very great pleasure to be back with you. I can't see you very well because the lights are bright on me and they're dim on you, but I wanted to ask you some questions just to start off the proceedings. I want to know how much choice you give your students in your classrooms. So here's some questions. Do you give them choice? Do they can choose when to drink water? Put your hand up if your kids can drink water when they want to in the classroom. Okay, a few of you, maybe not too many. Put your hand up if your kids can choose who to sit next to. Okay, not so many of you. Put your hand up if your kids can choose when to talk to someone. Put your hand up if you can choose when your kids can choose who to ask for help in the classroom. Okay, good, some of you. Put your hand up if your kids can choose how to plan their day, what learning they're going to do at which point during the day. Oh, about 5 of you. Put your hands up if the kids can choose how the furniture is arranged in the classroom. Yes? Still a few. Put your hands up if the kids can choose what color the walls will be. Yeah? Some. Put your hand up if your kids can choose to be the first person to evaluate their own work, to mark their work for themselves. Yeah, good, some of you. Put your hand up if the kids can choose what lessons to go to and which ones they don't want to go to. Nobody. Okay. Put your hand up if the kids can choose what the rules will be in the classroom. Okay. More of you, a few more. Put their hand up if the kids can choose what the punishments will be if you break the rules. Okay, small number of you. Put your hand up if the kids can decide who deserves the punishment. Not so many of you. Okay, that's interesting. I travel around the world a lot, and I go to a lot of schools, and I talk to a lot of teachers, and there are a lot of schools around the world that would have put their hands up to all of those questions. So you're not typical, or you're typical of some parts of the world, but not typical of other parts of the world. I'm going to a school tomorrow in Wales, in the United Kingdom, where the kids choose who are going to be their teachers, where they plan their own day, where they decide what the rules are, where if one of their fellow mates, one of their compañeros breaks the rules, they decide what the punishment will be. I was in a school in Australia not long ago, where a class of 10-year-olds at the beginning of the day were given a menu of learning tasks by their teacher to do some writing, to do some mathematics, to do some science exploration, And the first thing they did in the day was to sit with their buddy, with their learning buddy, for the first 10 or 15 minutes of the day and plan the sequence of the activities, which ones they were going to do first. And they had very interesting conversations about how to make those decisions. Some of these activities were more enjoyable than others. So do you do the enjoyable ones first, because they're the ones that are on your mind? Or do you save the enjoyable ones up till later in the day as a reward for having completed the other tasks? And these 10-year-olds were perfectly articulate, perfectly confident to make those decisions. In a lot of schools, teachers are changing the way they teach in order to prepare their young people to be entrepreneurial, to be enterprising. You don't learn to be enterprising by being kept a prisoner, do you? You learn to make decisions by being given decisions to make. And by being in a place where the complexity of the decisions, the richness of the decisions, is gradually expanded, so that you gradually expand your ability to take responsibility for your own education. So that you learn, you build the capacity to manage and organize and plan and design learning for yourself. Because that's what being enterprising means, isn't it? It means being a self-starter, being a self-organizer, being someone who is competent and confident to take charge of their own lives, to decide what risks are worth taking. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you will surely take some risks, won't you? You will be trying new things. You'll be looking for new markets. You'll be designing new products. To be an entrepreneur, to be enterprising, you will need to have that confidence and that capacity. So our job is to help youngsters build those capacities. And that means we have to constantly be looking for what they might be capable of managing, organizing, planning, and designing for themselves. When I was at school, my teachers didn't think like that. My teachers assumed that we wouldn't be capable. So they never tested our ability to become more capable. They assumed that it was their job to do all the planning and the designing and the thinking and the evaluating and the marking of everything that went on in schools. That's what it meant to be a teacher. But in many of these countries around the world, in many of the schools that I know and the schools that I visit, these teachers are now teaching in a slightly different way, in a way that is designed not only to help children learn their mathematics, their Spanish, their history, their geography, the subjects they need to learn, but to teach them in a way that builds their capacity to be independent, their capacity to think for themselves, and the capacity to be proactive, the capacity to be independent and to think for yourself is surely one of the most important characteristics of an entrepreneur. So it's not our job simply to add on some new little bits and pieces to the existing curriculum and the existing pedagogy of schools. That doesn't do the job if we carry on schooling in a way which protects children from the opportunity of making these decisions, of growing in their capacity to make these decisions for themselves. There's a rather unpleasant American saying. I don't like it, but I'm going to tell you what it is anyway, and you've probably heard it. There was a woman who might have become President of the United States called Sarah Palin, who used to use this expression. She said, if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. So our job is not simply to put lipstick on education. It's not to add some cosmetic. Our job is to look at the way the pig behaves and help the pig to help the children become more competent in their own lives. That's what we need to be thinking about. That's what we need to be planning. So what are the characteristics of the entrepreneur? Let me read you something that I read when I was preparing for this talk from one of America's foremost business philosophers, a man called Jim Rohn. He's talking about an enterprising or an entrepreneurial person. He says an enterprising or entrepreneurial person, is one who comes across a pile of scrap metal and sees the beginnings of a wonderful sculpture. An enterprising person is one who drives through an old, run-down part of a town and sees a new commercial or housing development. An enterprising person is one who sees opportunity in all areas of life. To be enterprising is to keep your eyes open and your mind active. It's to be skilled enough, confident enough, creative enough, and disciplined enough to seize opportunities that present themselves to you. A person with an enterprising attitude says, find out what you can before action is taken. Do your homework, do the research, be prepared, be resourceful. Do all you can in preparation of what's to come. They don't have a teacher to tell them that. They don't have a teacher to organize that for them. They have to be their own researcher, their own disciplined inquirer, don't they? Because they're not going to be followed around for the rest of their lives by you, by a kindly supervisor telling them what to learn and when to learn and how to learn it and what they need. They're going to be able to have to do that for themselves. Enterprising people always see the future in the present. Enterprising people always find a way to take advantage of a situation, not to be burdened by it. And enterprising people aren't lazy. They don't wait for opportunities to come to them. They go after opportunities. Enterprise means always finding a way to keep yourself actively working towards your ambition. So let me distill out of that what some of these characteristics are which make you a good entrepreneur. We've already talked about the ability to be independent, to be self-organizing. What about curiosity? What about adventurousness, the spirit of adventure? I was in a school in England a couple of months ago. The school motto, the phrase that sums up the philosophy of the school, was live adventurously. And everything in that school was designed to support the development of that confident, adventurous, exploratory, inquisitive attitude to life. What about the need to be determined, to be resilient, to not give up easily, to keep going 12, 14 hours a day to make your dream come true? Is that important? Lots of people are talking about resilience today. Resilience, grit, growth mindset. These are fashionable notions in education, which many of you will be familiar with. And most teachers I know say, yes, great idea. We want kids who are resilient, that is, kids who don't give up quickly when they can't do something. Kids who keep going, who can think of another possibility to try. Are you teaching in a way that stretches that capacity? Are you looking to see whether you're being successful in stretching that capacity? In my country, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Singapore, in Chile, in Brazil, in Dubai, teachers are looking for ways to build these capacities in young people. And everybody I know, wherever I go, people say, yes, we want kids to be resilient. And then I ask them another question. I say, great, I agree with you. I think it's really important. It's so important that obviously you have ways in your school of checking whether you're being successful. So tell me, what are you doing in your school to inform yourselves of whether your way of teaching is actually means that your 11-year-olds are more willing to persist for longer, struggling with difficult things and not giving up, than they did when they were 10 years old or 9 years old. And sometimes they give me a good answer, and sometimes they haven't thought that far yet. But if we're interested in breeding entrepreneurs, young people who have that willpower, that resilience, that determination, that perseverance, then obviously we'll be thinking about these things, won't we? We'll be designing ways. They may not be very good ways to start with, but in our staff meetings and in our staff rooms, we'll be thinking and talking about what does it mean to be resilient, and how would we know if our children were becoming more resilient? What about creativity, imagination? We know that all these characteristics, the science tells us that all of these characteristics of young people are capable of being developed in the right atmosphere, in the right culture. Children grow in their entrepreneurial spirit when they find themselves in an environment which encourages, which invites, which challenges, which supports the growth of those characteristics. So these are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking. Creativity, imaginative, inventive. Young people who have a mind that just naturally, when they're stuck, when they're finding something difficult, thinks of a new possibility. Well, maybe we could. Well, perhaps we might try. Well, what else could we try here? They have that mindset, don't they? Thomas Edison, one of the most famous creators in the history of the world, when he died, he had so many patents in America. Books and books and books of his own inventions. Once said, if you want to have a great idea, have thousands of ideas. And maybe 999 of them won't turn out to work. That's what he said when one of his experiments to invent the light bulb failed. A journalist said to him, so your experiment has just failed, and you've had lots of failures. He said, no, I've just discovered 999 ways that won't work, and now I'm working on the 1,000th one. That's an entrepreneur, isn't it? Someone who couples their resilience with their creativity, with that sense of possibility. What about being sociable? What about being a good collaborator? What about being able to adopt multiple perspectives on a complex problem? Having the inclination to put yourself in other people's shoes and to look at a complicated situation through a variety of different people's eyes. Developing empathy, developing that ability to adopt multiple perspectives. That's a very important driver of creativity, to be able to move your perspective and look from a different angle on problems. Increases the likelihood that you'll come up with the invention that will make your fortune, if you have that mindset. So when you're teaching history, are you teaching history? Are you designing activities in the classroom which are deliberately designed to stretch, to strengthen children's ability to put themselves in different positions? I was in a lesson the other day, a history lesson, in a school in England. The children were being asked to do some writing about a historical event in British history, which they'd been studying in their class, through the eyes of 3 different people. They were studying the Tudors. It's an iconic history topic in England. And they were writing about an event as if, to the best of their ability, as if they were Queen Elizabeth I. And then they had to write the story again as if they were Mary, Queen of Scots. And then they had to write it again through the eyes of the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the British court. The task that the teacher had designed for them was designed not only to teach them some history, but to stretch their ability to put themselves in other people's shoes. It's not easy for a 12-year-old boy growing up in the Docklands area of Cardiff in the year 2015 to imagine, to put himself into the body, the life, the heart, the mind of a virgin queen in the 16th century. But he tried. He stretched he was stretching his empathy muscles. Because we know that children's minds are like muscles. They're not muscles. They're made of neural tissue, not muscular tissue, but they're like muscles in that they get stronger and more skillful through exercise. We become stronger and more skillful by being pushed to our limit, don't we? When you go to the gymnasium, when you go to a fitness center, you work hard, you sweat, you get tired, because you believe that by working hard and getting tired, you'll get fitter and stronger, don't we? Children should believe that their minds are like that. So that in school, as in the schools that I visit, the children are all saying to their teachers, "That's too easy, miss. Give us something harder." Because they know that by working on things that are difficult, that's how they get smarter. That's how they become more resilient. That's how they become more ingenious. Yet, strangely, there are still some schools, a few that I go into, where the children don't have that attitude, where they don't like being stretched. They don't like being made to think. They don't like being given challenges that make their brains hurt. Because for some odd reason, they've come to believe that if they have to struggle, if they have to try hard, if they have to get sweaty, that means they're not very bright. That means they're not very intelligent. So they find that an aversive experience, particularly the high achievers. When they come to something that they can't do easily, they get upset because they can't look bright quickly. They can't look intelligent quickly. And they've come to think that being intelligent means getting everything right first time, without making any mistakes, without having to exert any effort. Now, what a stupid virus to feed into children's minds, isn't it? Because it makes them allergic to effort. It makes them find hard work something that they don't want to engage with because they feel stupid, because they think that mistakes are shameful. Wouldn't that be a funny thing to do to children? To fit that bit of mental malware into their brains so that they were retarded as learners, because learning comes through struggle, doesn't it? It comes through effort. It comes through making mistakes. The famous Irish playwright Samuel Beckett famously said, "Ever tried, ever failed. Never mind, try again, fail again, fail better." Now, wouldn't you like to have a class of children who had that attitude? Who were willing to commit themselves completely to things that were difficult, things that were tricky, because if they're going to be entrepreneurs, they're going to need that mindset, because they almost certainly won't get it right first time. The product won't work first time. The t-shirts won't sell first time. They're going to need those qualities. And we can't give it to them just by talking to them, can we? Just by telling them that mistakes are good. We give them those qualities by designing challenges which are just beyond their grasp, so that through struggling with them, they gain the experience not only of success, but of pride at having done something difficult for themselves. And that then feeds their enterprising mindset for the rest of their lives. So we should be thinking about lots of different ways in which we design what goes on in our classrooms. I think there are 3 levels, 3 layers of learning that go on in every classroom, and they're going on all the time. The first layer, I think of these as being like the layers of flow in a river. Imagine a river, and on the surface, things are moving quite quickly. They're very visible. You can see what's going on the surface, and that's the knowledge of the curriculum. Little packages of knowledge floating by fairly quickly. Here we're going to do the Spanish Civil War, and now we're doing the periodic table, and now we're doing adding fractions, and now we're doing whatever. We're very familiar with that way of thinking about the curriculum. On the surface of the river, fast-moving and visible. Easy to manage, easy to plan, easy to talk about. Lower down, below the surface of the river, the water runs a little more slowly. And at that level, we are talking about the learning of skills, expertise, literacies, mathematical literacies, digital literacies, graphical literacies, visual literacies, literary literacies. We're talking about the development of those disciplined ways of knowing, aren't we? Which we help youngsters develop in schools. We're not just teaching them mathematics. We're teaching them to think like mathematicians, to know how to struggle like a mathematician struggles with a difficult problem. There's no point in just teaching them how to turn a handle and produce a lot of right answers. A page full of ticks of correct answers isn't worth as much as a page full of errors that you learnt from. is it? Because learning is what makes you grow. Learning is what makes you better at things. So that's the second layer of the river. Down at the bottom of the river, it's darker down there. Things move more slowly down at the bottom of the river. And that's where young people's attitudes to learning are being shaped by being in our classrooms. For good or bad. I don't think, in my country, I've never met a teacher who gets up in the morning with a smile on her face, happy that she has another day, another set of opportunities to go into school and help her children, her students, become more passive, more dependent, more compliant, more unadventurous, more frightened of making mistakes, more only interested in the mark or the grade and not in the subject matter itself. I can't imagine a teacher whose joy in life was to have that effect on young people. Yet in my country, many teachers have had that effect without meaning to, through the way they taught, because they did too much for their students. They over-planned, over-organized, over-evaluated, over-corrected, over-rescued their students. Teacher always hovering around so that the first sign of difficulty, the first sign that a child is really having to grapple with something, to struggle with something, the kindly teacher jumps in and rescues the child from the difficulty. Never mind, sweetie, don't worry. Let me explain it to you again. Let me show you how to do it. Thus depriving the child of the opportunity to strengthen their own learning muscles and to derive the pride and the satisfaction from having really worked at it and figured it out for themselves. When your children were 2 years old, I bet some of you had this experience. The child is trying to do something complicated and it's not working. And you come along very kindly, the mother, the father, and start to do it for them. Start to show them how to solve it. And the child turns to you and says, "No, mummy, me do it." Did you ever have that experience? Well, that's the experience I want you to have every day in your classrooms. No, miss, no, sir, me do it. We think we're nearly there. We think we're on the edge of it. Don't deprive us of the opportunity to have that pleasure, to build that resilience for ourselves. Don't make us weak by being too kind. Now that's a different way of thinking about being a teacher. For some teachers thought they were doing the best for children by rescuing and explaining and acting on that kindness. But if you think a little bit harder, you might wonder whether that's the deepest form of love that we can show our children. If we want them to be able to thrive, to be imaginative, to be resilient, to be creative, to be independent in a complex world, a world that's dizzyingly complicated, with all kinds of opportunities and challenges and risks and pitfalls and stresses and demands, the world that they're growing up into. I can't imagine any parent who wouldn't want their children to have that resilience, that inner strength to be able to cope, that inner magnet which shows them the way to go, which shows them the risk to take and the risk not to take. But they won't develop that if they've always been protected from risk, will they? If they haven't learnt how to do those things for themselves. So round the world, things are changing in education. And I know that they are in Spain and other Spanish-speaking countries. I was at a conference about 4 years ago in Bilbao, International Conference on Thinking. Some of you were there. Some of you were at the follow-up conference in Miami last year, ICOT 18, where there were thousands of people, thousands of teachers like you, from Colombia, from Argentina, from Peru, from Spanish-speaking Florida, all of whom were eager to learn how to be this kind of teacher. What do we change in our classrooms so that our children are growing in their independence from us? Well, there are all kinds of little things that we can change. We can change their attitude to making mistakes. We can change the way we deal with what in England we call rough work. We can change their attitude to the use of that precious little tool called the eraser, which in some classrooms functions to remove the shameful evidence of the children's lack of intelligence. If the eraser has that effect in your classroom, get rid of them. Throw them out. If the eraser acts to support, to develop that malware, which says mistakes are shameful, rather than mistakes are necessary steps on the road to learning, chuck them out. The children will complain because they've become addicted to the tick, to the right answer, some of them. They won't like it when their workbooks begin to look a little more untidy. But go look at Mozart's drafts of a symphony. Go look at Shakespeare's handwritten drafts. Go look at Pablo Neruda's working on a poem and see how messy they are. See how wonderfully, beautifully, creatively, intelligently messy their work looks on the way to producing something that is beautiful and novel and clean and valuable. We don't do our children a good service if we give them a wrong view of thinking about what mistakes are and the value of mistakes. We need to be thinking about how to design different levels of challenge for children so they get used to the idea of wanting to do things that are difficult, wanting to be stretched. So we could design, instead of just designing one activity for the children, I could design 3 or 4 different activities of different degrees of difficulty. In English schools, they call this the Chilli Challenges because they get hotter. Chili like the hot thing, right? Not like the country. The Chilli Challenges. And the children can choose which one to go for. And if they choose one that's too hot, then it doesn't matter. They can just choose one that's a little less hot. It's like when you go to, in my country, if you go to a Thai restaurant, on the menu, they have little signs of different numbers of chilies to tell you how hot the food is. If you choose something that's too hot for you, no matter. Just choose one that's got 2 chilies instead of 3 chilies. Or you can teach the children a way that get them interested in, yes, miss, we've done the 4 chili challenge. We worked it out together. Now what shall we do? And my friend Becky, who's a wonderful primary school teacher, says to that pair of children, why don't you go over there, sit quietly, because there's another pair of children who finished the 4 chili challenge, and see if you could design a 5 Chilli challenge and give it to those children. They're learning to design their own learning. They're learning to relish difficulty, to enjoy the challenge, to tell a teacher when something is too easy that they're wasting their time. You're not looking smart, you're just showing off if you just do something that's easy and get it correct and get it right. We can change the way we talk. We can have more creative students by a simple shift in the way we talk about information in our classrooms. When I was at school, my teachers always used what in English I would call is language. This is what these are called. There are 4 processes. This is the correct way of thinking about these things. When I talk to a class in is language, they have no option to think, to criticize, to critique, to be imaginative. The very language that I use removes that possibility, doesn't it? If it is like this, then all they can do is just learn it, just remember it, just memorize it. But if I say to them, there's a Harvard professor who's suggested that there might be 8 different types of intelligence. That's his idea. Maybe there's another one. Do you think you could think about whether there's a 9th kind of intelligence? Some of you will have come across the theory of multiple intelligences of Howard Gardner. You could get the children thinking in a very different way. They become much more critical, much more imaginative. If you say, could be. Some people have called it this. There could be 4 of these. This might be the way it works. Immediately, a different set of mental muscles is invited. They become critical, they become imaginative, they become more enterprising, they become more entrepreneurial in their approach to learning through a single shift in language. There are beautiful experiments conducted on this by a Harvard professor. The children learn the information at the same speed to the same level, whether you say is or could be. But when you ask them to do something creative with that information, then the children who've been taught in the subjunctive way with could be become much more, they now become much more intelligent. A simple shift in language. So there are dozens of little shifts that we can make, small adjustments to the habits that we make in normal classrooms with normal subject matter that can stop steering children in the direction of becoming more passive and compliant and timid and unadventurous, and now start creating a strong current, a strong rip in the ocean of our classroom, which is now encouraging them and inviting them in the direction of becoming, in the context of their maths and their history and their geography and their science, beginning to stretch and strengthen those muscles that will eventually enable them to become the entrepreneurs of tomorrow. Thank you very much.